Well everyone, it's time for us to go ahead and compare none other than the M1 iPad Pros that have came out very recently, aka the only iPad Pros you can buy right now, brand new from Apple, and the M2 MacBook Air that has just came out. Now what I will definitely tell you is there are pros and cons between both of these MacBooks. There's definitely not a perfect one, and when I say both of these MacBooks, I really only mean the M2 MacBook Air and the iPad Pro, but I will tell you there's a lot of advantages with buying an iPad Pro, and there's a lot of advantages of buying an M2 MacBook Air. I have always been somebody who purchases MacBooks way more than iPads, and I prefer using a MacBook in my workflow than an iPad, but I know of a ton of people who swear by iPads, and like I said, you can't really go wrong with either one, but I'm sure there are a lot of people who use both these machines and have a great time using them. If you want to pick up either one of these ones, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there, and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now starting off with the price tags of both of these, obviously the M2 MacBook Air is going to be a little bit more pricier just because it is a newer machine with a newer chipset, but some of these iPad Pros have actually gone up in value, and actually if you go ahead and buy certain models of these iPad Pros, they're going to be more expensive than the base M2 MacBook Airs. Now the iPad Pros come out in two different versions, an 11-inch model and a 12.9-inch model, with varying different features and different things between them. The 11-inch iPad Pro costs $799 for the base model, the 12.9-inch model costs $1099, and most probably you're looking at the 12.9-inch model if you're looking at an M2 MacBook Air. On the M2 MacBook Air, it costs $1199, so theoretically $100 more expensive than the 12.9-inch more expensive iPad Pro, but there's also a Wi-Fi plus cellular option of the M1 iPad Pro for that 12.9-inch model, including for the 11-inch model as well, and that is about $200 more expensive than their, base models. So for the 12.9-inch iPad Pro, that is $1299, $100 more than the base M2 MacBook Air. So realistically speaking, yeah, the base ones without cellular are cheaper, but if you spec it up for the cellular ones, they're going to be a little bit more expensive. So that is one thing to keep in mind in the price tag standpoint. In terms of displays between them, in terms of the body actually, before I get to the displays, portability wise, they're both going to be very portable for their types of machines. The iPad Pros are going to be a little bit more so, just because you don't have to carry around a keyboard and a trackpad, but thinness and everything like that, they're both very thin machines for their day and age, I will say, but the M2 MacBook Air is a little bit more surprising because of the amount of chipset and the amount of power that you're getting, not the amount of chipset, but the amount of power that you're getting within that machine, which is actually very, very cool to me. The fact that you can get that type of machine and that type of form factor is actually really, really awesome. On the M1 iPad Pros, I feel like these are awesome machines as well, and just because you are getting a very solid machine. You're getting a really good camera setup on this thing, you're getting a really, really nice display, probably one of the best displays out there on the market, and you're still maintaining a really good operating system on this thing too, which is iPadOS. Now with the M2 MacBook Air, the coolest thing about this is definitely with its kind of upgraded design and with its upgraded body. Personally, I love macOS a lot more, and with the M2 MacBook Air, one of its biggest advantages, I will say, is the 2 ports as well as MagSafe. Having the ability of having 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports is awesome. On the iPad Pros, we do have 1 Thunderbolt 4 port, which is really, really cool. You have the ability of utilizing all those other, peripherals that you can use within iPadOS, but like I mentioned, I like macOS a lot more, and you're definitely getting a much more of a desktop experience on there versus on iPadOS, but there's a lot of people who prefer iPadOS as well. It just depends what you like. But having MagSafe on the MacBook Air is a really nice touch, and I really like having that built in as well. Now flipping these things open, or flipping the MacBook Air open, you have that 13.6-inch display on it, which looks really good. It's a Liquid Retina display. The iPad Pros also have Liquid Retina displays, but they do have True Tone and ProMotion built in at 120 Hz. The MacBook Air does not have that, so please keep that in mind. The display on the iPad Pros is going to look much better than the display that is on the MacBook Air. Is it a big deal? It really depends on how you look at it. If you're docking these things up to a different display, it doesn't really matter, but if you're using these on an everyday basis, you may be getting a little bit of a better experience on the iPad Pros than on the MacBook Airs. And I will tell you, the MacBook Air display is still pretty good, but you're getting a much better display on the iPad Pros. But you are getting the full-size keyboard on the M2 MacBook Air, you're getting a trackpad built in as well, and you are getting, I would say, a more powerful and just a more functional machine from a MacBook Air than an iPad Pro. Personally, I've owned many iPads, I've owned many MacBook Airs and just MacBooks and Macs in general, and I've always used my MacBooks and Macs way more than my iPads. Now, like I said, other people have different things. If you're somebody who uses an iPad or likes to use iPad and iPadOS related, applications, things like using that Apple Pencil to draw and take notes and, that type of realm, well then by all means go for an iPad. But I will say from a pure functional standpoint from my workflow, I've always found Macs to be the better ones for me personally. Now, one of the bigger differences as well between these two has to be the performance. How does the M1 chipset compare against the M2 chipset? Apple has done their own tests, and from everything they've said, obviously they're going to say it's a much more powerful, much more better, and much more, just functional machine overall. And it's definitely the case. You're going to be getting a much more powerful machine from something like a MacBook Air with the M2 chipset rather than an iPad with an M1 chipset. But one thing I will definitely tell you as well, iPadOS is it just feels like a much more, smoother machine, a smoother operating system, as well as with that 120 Hz than macOS in a lot of different cases. I have a 14-inch MacBook Pro, and this thing, even though it's my main MacBook and I like using it a lot, for some reason it overheats a lot. It kind of has a lot of weird things here or there I don't really understand with. With iPads, my iPad may overheat, but even my 2018 iPad Pro still feels very fast, and it still feels just so smooth overall. Even though, like I said, I prefer Macs for my workflow, I feel like iPads are very smooth, and like I said, give me a 2018 iPad Pro, that thing still feels blazing fast with that ProMotion display. The MacBook Air, the M2 model, is very fast as well, but who knows how it's going to hold up 4 years from now. My 13-inch, M1 MacBook Pro was kind of overheating quite a bit. I had to reset it every week just to kind of, get it going, just, power it down, power back up, but it's kind of annoying. With my iPads, I don't really have to do that. So that was one thing to keep in mind. I will also say benchmarks, everything like that. Obviously, it's going to sway more towards the M2 chipsets, but realistically speaking, even if you use an M1 MacBook Pro, it's really going to be about the same. Just depends on what you do with it. I will say we're not really comparing the M1 chipset against the M2 chipset. You're comparing iPadOS and macOS, and it's really kind of hard to tell which one is which, and it's really kind of hard to tell which one is going to work out the best for you in your specific use case. I will say the best thing you can kind of compare is the RAM. With the M2 MacBook Air, you can go up to 24 gigabytes of RAM. With the iPad Pros, you can go up to 16 gigabytes of RAM, which is actually really cool. So you have that type of capability here between both as well, which is really awesome. But you can spec out the M2 MacBook Air to be a more powerful machine when it comes down to it. So when it comes down to that, and that is another big thing to keep in mind, I will also say one of the biggest advantages of getting an iPad Pro is definitely with Apple Pencil 2 support. You can go buy an Apple Pencil 2 and utilize a really solid stylus for your iPad, but also the camera quality and just the camera in general from an iPad Pro is really good. This is about as great as an iPhone 13 camera, maybe more like an iPhone 12, but it's still a really solid camera that you're getting from this thing too. The camera on the M2 MacBook Air on the front, you only have one, but it's a 1080p sensor, which really isn't that bad. And to be honest, it's probably one of the better, front-facing cameras on most Macs available today. With the specific iPad Pro cameras here, I think these are great cameras, and for a tablet that you're going to take around with you everywhere, they're actually very solid options. So I think when it comes down to the camera setups on both the iPad Pro and the iPad Pro 12.9 inch, very solid cameras. I mean, these are some of the best cameras you can still buy on any iPad, and I would still highly recommend buying these iPad cameras for sure, just because of the cameras. They are very good quality. So that kind of takes us to the end of the video. And to be honest, I really don't think there is a clear answer here per person of which specific MacBook is the better one or which specific iPad. Should you buy an iPad Pro or should you buy a M2 MacBook Air? And I'll be honest, for me personally, it is a no-brainer. I would highly recommend buying an M2 MacBook Air, even if things were switched, even if it was like an M2 iPad Pro or an M1 MacBook Air. I would rather buy an M1 MacBook Air. I would rather probably use it like a 2020 MacBook Air, to be honest, with the Intel chipset, just because it works better in my workflow. Even if the iPads were faster, if they had more RAM, if they just were better in every single area, if they had just every single thing better than the iPad, than the MacBook Air, I would still probably prefer MacBook Air just because of macOS. I really rely on macOS and desktop applications. Until the day iPads bring desktop applications, I just won't be able to switch over my workflow to the iPads, and I'm not even that demanding of a user. Just imagine somebody who really wants to take it up a notch and go even crazier. Then it's going to be a little bit of a different story for them. So personally, that's kind of how it kind of revolves around my world right now. I kind of have to rely on Macs in general. But if you don't really, rely on any piece of technology right now, I think getting an iPad Pro, especially that 11-inch model at $799, or if you go in the used market, it may be a better deal for a lot of people out there. So that kind of covers it up. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.